When I ran for mayor, I said I was going to tax the rich. Well, today, we're taxing the rich. I'm thrilled to announce we've secured a pied-à-terre tax, the first in New York's history. This is an annual fee on luxury properties worth more than $5 million, whose owners do not live full-time in the city. Like for this penthouse, which hedge fund CEO Ken Griffin bought for $238 million.
That was New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani announcing his plan to tax wealthy residents' second homes as he stood outside of Citadel CEO Ken Griffin's multi-million-dollar penthouse. But that video didn't sit well with two of the city's richest, including Griffin, who had this to say about it.
I actually had to see it a second time because the first time I couldn't believe what I was watching. And I'll tell you, it took a moment to digest what I was watching. What really upset me about the video was the fact that it put me in harm's way. To turn me into a political puppet was just in poor taste, really poor taste.
New York real estate titan Stephen Roth went even further, saying, quote, "I consider the phrase tax the rich when spit out with anger and contempt by politicians both here and across the country to be just as hateful as some disgusting racial slurs, and even the phrase from the river to the sea." He's referring there to a controversial pro-Palestinian slogan. I don't know about the racial slur piece. I do think Ken Griffin's discomfort with somebody being outside of his home
they doxed him. I think
reasonable
Mamdani
to have.
really screwed up there. I think it's boneheaded and short-sighted. Listen, Ken Griffin has now moved to Miami. We know, because we live in Miami, Ken Griffin has single-handedly changed the face of philanthropy in Miami. He's giving to everything. But we just saw, and in that clip we didn't see it in the clip of Ken Griffin, but he alludes to the assassination of the CEO of the health insurance company by Luigi Mangione last year. And the fact that this puts him in the crosshairs. I think Mamdani did this for clicks. I don't think he needed to do this. In Florida, and I think in a lot of states, people who have homestead there, who are permanent residents, usually pay or have some tax loops that somebody who has a pied-à-terre or has a second home has to pay higher taxes than I do as a person in Florida who's got a homestead exemption because I'm a permanent resident. So I don't know why he's got to do this entire show. I do think he put Ken Griffin in harm's way, Ken Griffin's children in harm's way. I just think it was stupid, and I think Mamdani should have the humility to accept that and to apologize, because this is a city that is the financial center of the world, and if people like Ken Griffin start leaving and deciding not to buy second homes here and not to have their businesses here, New York City is going to be in a world of hurt.
But I mean, there is also there's that extreme, and then there's the other extreme of Stephen Roth saying that this is like a racial slur. I mean, when people hear that, they're like, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, look, people can make their own determination for that, but I want to pick up with where Anna was leading to. She's right. 1.6% of the wealthiest people in this city pay nearly half of the taxes. If those folks leave, to Anna's point, you're going to have a financial crisis, the magnitude of which Mamdani does not understand. You think about everyday things that people utilize, public transit, safety, education, all of the taxes that go to provide for all of those things for poor people in this city. What in the hell are they going to do if 44% of those dollars all of a sudden disappear overnight? And this is the short-sighted nature of this very progressive or socialist mayor. It doesn't make any sense.
You're right to have that debate about what the impact is going to be on the
What's
city.
significant?
But I will say that you also have to keep in mind that New York City has continuously increased their tax rate. And they've done so and not decreased the number of extremely wealthy people
I don't necessarily agree with.
In fact, the number of extremely wealthy people in the city has increased.
I think Anna's point about being in front of someone's home, for all of us, I'm assuming, have wrong. I mean, and if I'm wrongfully assuming, God bless you, but all of us have been through threats or having law enforcement in front of our house. I mean, me, you, and Donna Brazil talk about that all the time. Just the different type of threats that we deal with. I know Scott deals with it as well. That is beyond the pale of politics and something that you should have the humility to recognize and the political wherewithal to correct that. So let's say that first.
Sure.
What about the impulse to do it in the first place?
The second part, the impulse to do it, or the reasoning behind it, is the messaging. And like, no one is leaving New York because of tax the rich.
That's not true.
That's not true.
Actually, the statistics don't bear that out. But also, let's just say this. And while there is this like inordinate attention that we're paying to people who are beyond wealthy, because we're not talking about people who are making $1 million or 10 million.
Well, that's still a very small percent of the
we're
American
talking about people who make
even at $1 million.
That's my point exactly. I think one of the things, and I'm not a Zohran Mamdani fan by any stretch of the imagination, but one of the things that has occurred in New York City since he has been elected is that people are paying attention to the class warfare that's happening in this country. And we're not, and listen, we're not just talking about the rich and them being uncomfortable because I simply say tax the rich. In fact, that's not anything on my top 10 policy initiatives. However, when we're having this discussion, there are people in this country that are literally starving. There are people in this country, I'm not finished.
Okay,
there are people in this country who literally cannot, they're the working poor who work 40, 60 hours a week and cannot afford health care. There are people in this country who are going through these things. And so I totally get Zohran Mamdani highlighting the plight of the working poor in this country, distasteful as it may be. I agree.
But Bakari, it's very short.
Because he's talking.
Hold on, Kevin. Let's share my close quickly,
I'm in
and then we'll come
agreement
back
with
at
you
the
morally
other
about the plight of working class people. Like, I'm not going to ignore that. Everybody at this table, we have people in our own families that are working class.
Sure.
I'm never going to dismiss that. But the short-sighted nature of the mayor to go after what I would argue success, because at some point, maybe you go after the top 1%, and when you tax the hell out of them, then you go after the group that's beneath the top 1%. And at some point, everybody at this damn table will be next because of our income levels. So what message does that signal to younger people, to hardworking people in New York City, across the country? Should they not attempt to be successful? Should they not attempt to earn a significant amount of money?
We're gonna take a quick break, and we're gonna come back on the other side. And Kevin, you'll have your say.